What if everything you've been told about death is incomplete? What if there exists a book so profound, so detailed, that it maps the exact journey every soul must take beyond the final breath? Welcome, seeker of truth, to the revelation of revelations. Today, we unveil one of humanity's most extraordinary and forbidden texts, the Ars Moriendi, the ancient art of dying. Imagine possessing a manual that doesn't just comfort you about death, but actually prepares you for the most important journey of your existence. This is the power of the Ars Moriendi. And no, this is not merely another religious consolation, it is a blueprint. A precise guide for navigating the treacherous waters between life and whatever lies beyond. Get ready, for together we will unlock its secrets, decode its warnings, and perhaps discover what it truly means to die well. The Ars Moriendi emerged in the 15th century, born from the collective wisdom of medieval mystics and scholars who witnessed the Black Death ravaged Europe. These weren't mere theologians writing from ivory towers. They were spiritual physicians who had observed thousands of deaths, documenting patterns and phenomena that science still cannot explain. The text was crafted by anonymous masters, figures, so devoted to understanding death's mysteries that they sacrificed their own identities to preserve this knowledge. They called themselves the Custodes Mortis, the guardians of death. But these guardians were not morbid passives. They were profound spiritual scientists, mystics who had mastered the art of conscious dying. The Ars Moriendi was born from their urgent need to guide not only the dying, but the living, offering them a path to transcendence even in humanity's darkest hour. From their observations, the Custodes Mortis recognized extraordinary patterns in the dying process, visions that repeated across cultures, encounters with beings of light and shadow, and most remarkably, the consistent appearance of what they termed the 5 temptations. These were not random hallucinations, but systematic challenges that every departing soul would face. They were invited to create this guide by the Church itself, which sought to provide comfort during the plague years when priests were dying faster than they could administer last rites. At that time, Europe was a continent in spiritual crisis. Death was everywhere, sudden and merciless, and traditional religious comfort seemed inadequate against such overwhelming mortality. The existing spiritual framework couldn't address the practical questions. What exactly happens in those final moments? How does one navigate the transition? What are the actual stages of dying? Upon receiving this commission, the Custodes Mortis faced resistance from various religious authorities who feared that too much knowledge about death might diminish the Church's power over the faithful. But the guardians understood something profound. Death is not punishment, but transformation, a moment of ultimate spiritual opportunity. They realized that in the dying process, consciousness enters a heightened state, where, freed from bodily distractions, it becomes extraordinarily receptive to divine truth. They saw that this was humanity's greatest chance for liberation, but they also knew that most people, when they die, become lost in confusion and terror that prevents them from recognizing this opportunity. Their mission was to create a guide that could be studied in life and applied in death, so that the mind would be prepared for what they called the Great Passage. In essence, they wanted to transform death from humanity's greatest fear into its greatest teacher. This compassion for human suffering is the foundation of the Ars Moriendi. They also understood that many might not achieve spiritual mastery in life, but they saw in death a final examination. And so they offered precise instructions for recognizing the divine light that appears to every soul at the moment of departure. The Ars Moriendi guides us through 5 crucial stages that every departing soul encounters. The first stage, tentatio contra fidem, the temptation against faith. In this initial phase, the dying soul experiences what the guardians called the great doubt, a moment where everything they once believed begins to crumble. The familiar world dissolves, and consciousness finds itself suspended between known and unknown. Here, the soul encounters its first tempter, a being of shadow who whispers that everything spiritual was mere illusion. This tempter appears not as a monster, but as pure rationality itself, offering seemingly logical arguments that death is simply extinction, that consciousness is merely brain chemistry, that all spiritual experiences were self-deception. The Ars Moriendi describes this as the most dangerous moment because the soul, stripped of its physical anchors, becomes vulnerable to absolute despair. For the prepared soul, this stage offers the possibility of ultimate faith. If consciousness can maintain its spiritual conviction despite the dissolution of everything familiar, it passes through to deeper mysteries. This recognition doesn't depend on religious doctrine or ritual observance. It is a direct test of the soul's fundamental trust in existence itself. In this moment, all doubt and fear must be transcended through pure faith. On the other hand, for those unprepared, the intensity of this dissolution can be overwhelming. The mind, instead of recognizing this as spiritual testing, may interpret it as confirmation of meaninglessness due to lifelong materialism or spiritual neglect. In this case, the soul retreats into despair, losing its first chance for liberation, and enters the subsequent stages where it faces increasingly complex spiritual challenges according to its karmic debts. The second stage, tentatio contra spem, the temptation against hope. As the great psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross once observed, death is simply a shedding of the physical body, like the butterfly shedding its cocoon. In this stage, the soul finds itself confronting the weight of all its failures, regrets, and missed opportunities. Here, consciousness experiences what the guardians called the review of sorrows, a vivid replay of every moment of pain it caused, every opportunity for love it rejected, every chance for growth it squandered. This stage manifests through encounters with what appear to be the souls of those it wronged, each presenting evidence of the departing soul's inadequacy. The tempter of this stage appears as perfect justice itself, methodically cataloguing every sin, every failure, every moment of weakness. The soul is initially overwhelmed by visions of its own unworthiness, which can manifest as scenes of judgment, condemnation, or eternal punishment. These visions possess a terrible clarity and seem to offer irrefutable proof of the soul's damnation. However, for the prepared mind, these visions reveal their true nature as tests of spiritual maturity. In the hope stage, if the soul does not recognize the merciful, redemptive nature of divine love, it gradually confronts more intense visions of despair. These figures are manifestations of guilt, shame, and self-condemnation, taking on forms that reflect the soul's deepest fears about its own unworthiness. Importantly, these accusers are not external judges, but expressions of the soul's own unresolved guilt, reflecting the self-punishment that binds consciousness to cycles of suffering. This stage is described as a state where the mind confronts the full weight of its moral failures without the buffer of physical existence. Asterisk, it is a pure state of ethical reckoning, where everything is amplified. The accusations that arise resemble nightmares, but unlike ordinary guilt, they carry a cosmic weight and significance. This occurs because the soul, now freed from bodily distractions, experiences its moral energies in an unfiltered way. Everything that was rationalized and suppressed emerges with overwhelming intensity. These accusations are considered opportunities for purification and redemption, as each one represents an aspect of the self that requires forgiveness. Those who maintain spiritual hope during this stage can perceive that all these condemnations, deserved though they may seem, are opportunities for divine mercy. The recognition of this truth enables the soul to transcend despair and continue its journey toward liberation. At this stage, the Ars Moriendi advises the soul to focus on divine compassion, the infinite mercy that the guardians described as the light that forgives all shadows. Recognizing this mercy is the key to spiritual progress, as it represents the unconditional love that embraces all beings. It is the sun that burns away the clouds of guilt, the grace that remains constant despite all moral failures. If the soul manages to see beyond its own unworthiness, it can experience profound healing and thus advance to the next stage of dying. However, recognizing divine mercy is not easy for the guilt-ridden consciousness. For most souls, the accusations are so overwhelming and filled with apparent justice that it becomes impossible to believe in forgiveness. For this reason, the Ars Moriendi suggests that spiritual practitioners cultivate self-forgiveness in life and contemplate the boundless nature of divine love. With such practice, even when faced with the intense accusations of the hope stage, they will be able to maintain their trust in redemption and find peace. Guilt and self-condemnation are the greatest barriers to spiritual progress. The accusations, in their intensity, can provoke overwhelming shame, especially the visions of those the soul has wronged, which represent untransformed aspects of conscience. This shame creates a sense of unworthiness, preventing the soul from accepting the mercy that is always available. The soul may desire to flee from these accusations or, out of masochistic attachment, fixate on its own guilt, which keeps it bound. 2 cycles of self-punishment. To overcome this cycle, the soul must recognize its accusations as opportunities for grace. In the Ars Moriendi, this concept is known as misericordia, infinite mercy. The mind that recalls this mercy during the hope stage can observe all accusations but remains unattached, understanding them as temporary expressions of divine justice balanced by eternal love. The experience of this stage, therefore, is not condemnation or purposeless suffering, but a phase of purification where the soul confronts the mirror of its own conscience. It is a test that distinguishes those ready for redemption from those who still require further purification to accept divine love. The third stage, tentatio contra patientia, temptation against patience. In this final stage, we'll explore. Today, the soul faces its ultimate test, the temptation to abandon the dying process itself. Here, consciousness experiences what the guardians called the Great Rebellion, an overwhelming urge to return to life, to cling to existence, to reject the very process of transcendence it has begun. The soul has already passed through doubt and despair, but now it faces something perhaps more challenging, the temptation to turn back. This desire, as the Ars Moriendi teaches, is what prevents the soul from completing its sacred journey, keeping it bound to cycles of incomplete transformation. In this stage, consciousness is influenced by what the guardians called vital attachments, the magnetic pull of unfinished business, beloved relationships, cherished possessions, and unfulfilled dreams. These attachments function as spiritual chains, drawing the soul back toward the physical realm it is meant to transcend. If, for example, the soul carries intense love for family members, that love might manifest as an overwhelming need to return and protect them. Similarly, fear of leaving loved ones behind creates a vortex of attachment that prevents the soul from accepting its transition. During this stage, the soul experiences visions of all it is leaving behind, loved ones calling out in need, unfinished projects demanding completion, dreams that will never be realized. These visions often include scenes of the life the soul could still live, the experiences it could still have, the love it could still give and receive. Here, the soul is called to choose between clinging to the known and embracing the unknown, unconsciously guided by the very attachments that have defined its earthly existence. Asterisk. The Ars Moriendi suggests that upon experiencing these visions, the soul should maintain what the guardians called holy detachment, not the absence of love, but love transformed into blessing and release. Only then can it avoid being pulled back into incomplete existence. For those who can sustain this sacred letting go, this stage offers the final doorway to transcendence. There remains the possibility of what the guardians called the great completion, the soul's full acceptance of its transformation. This is the goal of conscious dying. Rather than being trapped by the illusions of attachment, the soul must recognize these visions as final tests of its readiness for liberation. Throughout the experiences of this stage, consciousness feels what the guardians described as the great pulling, an almost irresistible urge to return to familiar existence. It is as if the soul's entire earthly identity rebels against dissolution, demanding continuation of the story it knows. The choice to continue the dying process is not an easy one. It happens through what the Ars Moriendi calls supreme surrender, the soul's ultimate act of trust in the divine plan. This process reflects the guardian's belief that each death is an opportunity for cosmic reunion. The attachments the soul must release align with the spiritual lessons it came to Earth to learn. However, many souls cannot complete this surrender and end up bound to the earthly realm as what various traditions call restless spirits. Those who can see beyond attachment, however, may reach what the guardians called the state of perfect release, where instead of clinging to the past, soul merges into eternal peace. According to the Ars Moriendi, preparation for this final stage begins with how we live. By contemplating the temporary nature of all earthly attachments while still alive, we become more capable of the ultimate letting go that death requires. Spiritual practices such as meditation on impermanence and the cultivation of unconditional love strengthen the soul's capacity for sacred detachment. Thus, this final stage reveals a profound truth, that life and death are not opposites, but partners in the dance of existence, and that the cycle of attachment and release is nothing more than the soul's continuous journey toward perfect love. By freeing ourselves from the fear of letting go, we free ourselves to love more completely, reaching a state where there is no more clinging. For there is no longer the illusion that anything can truly be lost. The Ars Moriendi is not just a medieval manuscript or a collection of archaic beliefs. It is a mirror for the soul, a map for consciousness, and a key to the greatest mystery of existence. It teaches us that death is not the enemy of life, but its greatest teacher. As the guardians themselves wrote, to die well is to have lived well, and to live well is to die without fear. In this sense, the art of dying invites us to examine our own existence. Are we prepared for the ultimate journey? Are we ready to face the 5 temptations? Perhaps by studying these ancient teachings, we can not only prepare for death, also learn to truly live. If this exploration of the ultimate mystery resonated with your soul, share this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell us in the comments which of the 5 temptations concerns you most, for the path of conscious dying is one we must all walk, and together we can face the greatest mystery of all. Thank you for joining this sacred journey.